During our medical studies at university, we benefited from having several iconic teachers who went beyond the facts and the science to also give us history, personal anecdotes, and quotes, many of which still serve as inspiration for me every day. Our professor of surgery was particularly good at this. He insisted on giving us the history behind the different surgical techniques and added in no unclear terms, we'd better know it as well as the technique if we were to survive the oral exam with him, for which he was both famous and infamous. So let me continue that legacy and introduce you to Dr. Ambroise Paré, a French surgeon who lived 500 years ago in the Renaissance period. Not only was he a great surgeon who served 4 consecutive French kings, he was also a fantastic educator, and still today is considered the father of modern surgery. And one story that our professor of surgery told over and over about Dr. Paré was how, while operating on a patient one day, Dr. Paré suddenly stopped, turned around to his audience and said, "Gentlemen," because it was a man's business at that day, "watch closely." And he lifted his bloody hand and he said, "The only difference between this, a surgical blade, and the knife of the assassin is my hand." This was not a statement of arrogance, it was a lesson. And the lesson is, of course, very clear. It truly is intent that separates the surgeon from the assassin. The surgeon will wound, but wants to heal. The assassin wants to kill. But there is more to this than intent. Equally important as intent is competence. Because the incompetent surgeon, even with the best of intent, may end up killing the patient, whereas the incompetent assassin may walk away, leaving his victim alive. So a very good lesson. Never blame the knife, always look at the operator and make sure it's handled competently. And still today, those 2 qualities are the core of what makes up a good surgeon. Now, maybe less relevant at the time of Dr. Paré was a 3rd quality, but that is ever more important today, and that is communication. And that brings us to my simple personal definition of what makes a good doctor. There's the 3 C's. There's the C for good care, good competence, and good communication. Today, I want to focus on competence, particularly medical competence. I realize communication is also an important competence, but I want to ask ourselves, what makes a doctor competent? In essence, good medicine is based on good diagnosis. In fact, once you figure out what's wrong, the treatment, the next steps are usually pretty obvious. So what then, if indeed good diagnosis is really the essence, is the process by which a doctor makes a diagnosis, and why is this relevant to us? What happens if we walk into a doctor's office? What the doctor really is confronted with is a huge set of data points. And the best way to figure this is like a huge grid with all little dots, each one a data point. They're visual data points. How did you open the door? Did you tremble? What's the color of your skin in different parts of your body? Did you make eye contact? Is your eyes straight? Are your eyes blooded red? Those are just visual ones. Then there's the tactile ones that you can feel. There's smell, there's audition, there's a lot of data points. And so the task of the doctor is, in this huge mass of data points, to eliminate everything that's normal and to identify what is abnormal, which in medicine we call a symptom. Now, a symptom is something that is abnormal, and it can be abnormal by its presence. For example, you really shouldn't have a bump like that on your arm. Or it can be abnormal by its absence, like you have no reflex in your knee. and anything in between. And so the true art of decision making is symptom recognition. It is the detection of abnormality. And the crux of the matter is that to define abnormality, you first need to understand what is normal. Because it truly is the norm that defines abnormality. Okay? And so what the doctor does, starting with this huge grid, through progressive questioning and a medical examination, and increasingly more technical tests, the doctor starts taking out things that are normal, until something magically appears that starts to look like a fingerprint. Why a fingerprint? Because most diseases have a rather unique combination of specific symptoms. So once you get that right, you get a kind of a fingerprint of the disease and you have the right diagnosis. Job done. There's a huge issue that we don't talk about very much, and that actually we haven't had a solution for. And that is the fact that what we call normal in medicine is an artificial value. When I say normal body temperature is 37.4 Celsius, when I say normal blood pressure is 140/80, and I can go on and on and on, those are artificial values calculated on groups of people. But the truth is, the real question is, we are not groups of people. We are individuals. And in fact, you only need to look at your parents, or 2 kids if you have them, or your 2 best friends, to realize the deep individual differences that people have even with the same genetic background. About a year ago, a friend of mine calls me up and says, I'm really worried because my father, who's now in his 80s, is scheduled for a colonoscopy. A colonoscopy is a test, it's a medical examination whereby we use a flexible tube and camera to directly examine the inside of your intestines. Not only is it rather unpleasant, in the frail and elderly, it actually has some risk. So he was naturally concerned. So I asked him, but why do they want to do this test in your father? And he said, you know, they did this routine blood test in the elderly home where he is, and they found that he doesn't have enough red blood cells. And I said, yeah, that makes sense. Because if you don't have enough red blood cells, it means you're losing blood somewhere. And if you can't find an apparent place of bleeding, in elderly people, the most frequent cause is hidden bleeding from the gut with the stool. And that can point to something's going wrong in the intestine, and it may be a cancer, and the best way to detect that is a colonoscopy. So it makes sense. But tell me, what's your father's normal red blood cell count? I said, I don't know. How should I know? I said, okay, fine. Why don't you go back and sort through your father's medical papers and also make a phone call to his previous family physician and try to find out any blood values that you can find over the last 10 years. And then call me back. The next day he called me back, very proud. He had found 6 blood tests in the last 12 years. And guess what? At each and every moment in time, his father had a red blood cell count which was slightly below what we in medicine call normal. And what that really says, that was normal for his father. And that he didn't need the test and take the risk. So we canceled the colonoscopy. Happy to say that 1 year later, he's still doing very well and his blood cell count is still too low. And this shows you this is not a theoretical issue. When you use population norms to start judging individuals, you get wrong directions. Okay? And we've never had any solution for this except time. The longer you know an individual patient as a family physician or as whatever, the more you'll get a hunch of their normality and be able to put an individual data point in a framework. But there is fantastically good news that I want to share with you now. The digital revolution that is changing so many aspects of our life is actually also going to dramatically change this aspect. How is it doing that? We have more and more tools and apps, even in our phones, that can allow us at any moment in time and on a continuous basis to know about our own body. Our phone apps can tell us how much we move, how long we move. They can determine if we have a steady gait, if we tremble. You have things that can be incorporated in bracelets that tell you how much you sleep, how you sleep, how deep you sleep, how healthy your sleep is. And increasingly, we can measure more and more about ourselves. You know, they're even developing toilets that measure you before, after, and during. What that really means is that we are gathering for the first time in history knowledge about our own normality as individuals. And that is a dramatic difference from what we've ever had before. Because what it means is I will be able to go to the doctor and put my data points against my normal. And if I'm somebody who needs only 6 hours of sleep, then that means that's normal for me. And if I need 9 hours, I'm probably a teenager. And it's very dramatic because it will have many, many benefits. It will eliminate a lot of unnecessary visits to the doctor because you take a certain data point and you put it against your normal variation, because everybody varies throughout the day, throughout the week, even throughout the year. But it will also allow the opposite. It will allow more useful visits, because we will be able, with our apps, our tools, our wearable devices, or God knows, our implantable devices, to detect small differences over time that today get missed until it's too late. So it is truly a revolution, because in essence, what it means is that we, thanks to the digital revolution, will become the experts and guardian of our normality. And we will become a complementary partner to the doctor, who remains the expert and guardian of our abnormality. In other words, we will be able to say this is a symptom, and the doctor will say what it means. That partnership has never existed in history and is forming today thanks to the digital revolution. It is truly a huge, huge shift. But there's always buts in every good story. You only need to look at the internet to quickly realize two things. The first one is up on the screen right now. It is the fact that more data don't always bring you more value. In fact, you only need to look for a restaurant close to where we are now to find 50 with each 20 ratings and a lot of information. Too much data, too much information can not only be overwhelming, it can be daunting, confusing, and even straight out scary. So we need to deal with this. We need to learn to make sense of data, certainly when it concerns how we function, how our body functions. So we'll need to do something about this. The second thing you realize when you start going at the internet is there is definitely an age factor. People of my generation and older, we're still struggling harvesting internet. We're far away from blogging, Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat. And you know what? The hard truth is we may never get there. By the time you learn to harvest these new tools, these wearable medical devices, we'll be too old to read them. So that's really a big challenge. So what then is the solution that I would like to propose to you? We need to generate a generation of digital health natives. In the same way as our teenage children today already are digital natives who use social media in an incredible way to connect with people, to learn. We need a generation that has that same normality when it comes to using medical tools to monitor their own health. And there are many benefits to doing that. I'll just give you 3. The first one is that if you look on a population health, public health issue, the best generation, the best people to focus on to improve the health of a population is the generation that cares for 3 generations' health. Their own, their parents, and their children. And before you know it, our teenage children will be caring for us. And so from an effectiveness point of view, should you educate a generation, That's the generation to educate. The second reason is that we know from research that good health behavior is learned young. If you don't learn to clean your teeth every day when you're a kid, chances are you never will. And the same applies to healthy food, sports, and many other habits. So you need to start very young. And last but not least, a medical reason. There are simply certain things about our body that you better get on top of while you're still young. For example, did you know that we achieve the maximum bone that we'll ever have in our lives at the age of 20? It's downhill from there. So wouldn't you like to be able to measure it earlier and get to a higher peak by doing more exercise, drinking more milk, and other stuff? If you start measuring after 20 what your bone is, it'll be a depressing curve. This, of course, raises a very important question. If indeed digital tools will allow us better and more efficient and cost-efficient diagnosis and healthcare system, will this be for the privileged few? What about the billions of people that have no access to that? Will they be left behind even more than they are today? I predict that will not happen. I predict the reverse will happen. We, for once, will be the guinea pigs. We'll wear all these devices, use all those apps, and out of that will come the most efficient, easy to use, and cost-effective tools that can then be deployed around the world on a very low budget into those economies that have the least money to spend on health. So I truly believe we're at the verge of a digital revolution that will improve our health as individuals by more accurate decision making and as a population. But that will require us to start educating our children right now. Digital health indication needs to be part of the school curriculum. You need to learn how to deal with data. It is a public secret among physicians that we self-diagnose ourselves with most of the diseases we learn about through our medical education. Oh, I've got this too, so I have that. Next course, oh, I have that too. So you need to learn to do with it. You need some basic about statistics. You need to learn what is important to measure, what is not important to measure. So I foresee a bright future, but we will need to invest in educating our children right now. Thank you.